Today I'm going to show you how to make your kerosene heater more efficient. This is a older trick that older people used to do years ago. It's not commonly seen as much today with a lot of people not knowing how to do this. But what you're essentially going to do is you're going to make your kerosene heater burn more evenly by adjusting the way the coil sets on the burner. If the three rings inside this coil is not evenly balanced and one side is setting higher or lower, you will get a higher flame through the air gap in these little uneven spots here. Another thing is these crossbars. If you move them up and down and they don't have no weight on them, then you know all three of the rings are setting flush. That's the first way of checking these, because most of these, the holes are drilled unevenly, and a lot of times one of the coils will be setting higher or lower on these cross pins. But first you're going to want to take your kerosene heater down till it's down like this. Take the top of it off. We're going to check the wick first off. You're going to crank the wick up, and you're going to want to take a ruler, and you're going to want to check your wick height at its highest point and make sure it's completely the same all the way around. But once that's done, then you want to make sure all this is clean inside here, and make sure there's no debris in here that might make your coils set higher or lower. But we're going to lower that back down, and we're going to show you what we're talking about. You flip this over. You've got three different coils. You've got your outer coil, your inner coil, and your very last coil in the inner part. And what you're wanting to do is you're wanting this ring around here to lay flush. Each one of these rings, you want them to lay flush. If you get a small gap, air gap in this, it will suck air through. It'll come through the outside and come through this way, and you'll get a really high flame, and one side will be higher than the other. And by lowering these rings to where all three sets flush, then it'll adjust the airflow to where the airflow will come through the center. And this is where you're wanting the airflow to come through, is these holes right here. When the airflow comes through here, it'll come right through here and come through here, and then on the upper side, the air will come through here, and it'll bring the flame outward. This is how you adjust the flame. Now what we want to do is you want to lay it on there. You want to make sure all three rings are seated. You want to check the gap between here and here, and you want to make sure it's level all the way around. If this gap is uneven, and the center ring is set into one side, either the crossbar right here, one of these crossbars is holding this, and you'll have to rock it back and forth. And if these pins are loose, then that means, if you wiggle them up and down and they're loose, then that means it's not setting on one. But if it's setting on one, these pins will be tight. You'll have to drill the hole just a little bit on the top, just enough to let this set down. But you also have got to make sure that there is no uneven places on these. If one side is setting uneven, or if there's a burr on the edges of this, you'll have to take a flat file and you'll have to push it around until you get the high spot out of each coil. There'll be a high spot in certain spots. You'll have to take the high spots out, and then you'll have to check each one of these holes that the cross pin goes through and make sure none of these rings is setting on the crossbar. If it sets on any of those and one of these rings is got a gap in it, the air will flow under here and you'll get a high flame. So if you're getting high flames, either your ring is not setting flat or your crossbar is holding one of the coils from setting all the way down. And when you do this, you will have to take the crossbars out if you go to modify the holes to balance it. But what you're essentially doing is you're balancing all three of these coils on these two crossbars, and then you're also making sure these bottom rings set flush right here, here, and in here. Once these set flush, it'll stop the airflow from going this way, and it'll bring the airflow through these holes. And these holes will distribute the flame. This is the cooling ring. This is how it cools. And it goes up under here. And then it goes through the small. This is what heats the coils and burns off the excess fumes. But if you're having an uneven burn, then either your cross pins, one of them, is holding one of these rings too high, or these rings need to be laid on and checked for gaps, air gaps. Now, in order to check these rings for air gaps, you'll have to take these two crossbars out and take each individual ring out, and then you'll have to place the ring, the inner ring here, and the ring here, and the ring there. And you'll have to rock them back and forth and see if there's any gap in it. If there's a gap in the ring, you'll have to hand file each ring after you take them out. You'll have to slowly file out the high spots. But once each ring is laying flush and the crossbars is not holding any of the rings out of adjustment and they're all balanced, then you will get an even flame coming through the top here. And this one, you'll be able to tell when we rock this, there's a high spot on both sides. You see this? See a little bit of an air gap right in here. You want to try to get that air gap as little as possible, because that is what is sucking all your fuel and making your heater burn inefficient. It will suck a lot of air through these little gaps under the bottom, and it'll pull a lot of fuel through. You also want to check your cap. You want to check the seal and make sure it's sealing. The way to check the seal is you will tighten the cap down, let it burn for a while after it's warm, then you'll loosen the cap, pull the cap off, and then if you see a rise in the flame, then that means this seal that goes here is working. If this seal's not working, you won't see no difference in the flame up here when you take this cap loose. But this is how you adjust the airflow that goes through these coils. If any of these coils are off balance, you will get a uneven burn up here. You'll have a flame. Sometimes you'll even get these burn spots in the top showing. And this you can see this burn spot correlates with this cross pin. This cross pin was holding one of these inner rings up too high and letting the airflow come through. And it also correlates back over here where the cross pin comes out the back side. But when you take these off, these cross pins, you'll have to remove these little clips. And the way to remove these little clips is you'll have to take a wire and you'll have to pull each tab up slowly all the way around, doing it in a circular motion to get these off without breaking them. And then you can put them back on and reuse them once it's adjusted. But you usually leave these off while you're adjusting it. And as you file and balance these crossbars and you balance these rings out, once you get done, then you can put these little pins back on. Clips. But this is what makes a cheap heater different from an expensive heater, is the balance of the coils. But you can take a cheap heater and balance the coils inside and get an efficient burn and an even flame all the way around, just like an expensive heater. It just takes a little bit of work with modifying these holes in all three rings and making sure there's no gap underneath these three rings. But once that's achieved, the heater will burn hotter, the flame will be even all the way around, and it will be easier to adjust, and it will be easier to ignite. And this will make a more efficient heater. It'll make it easier to operate. There'll be less adjustments from the knob part. Once it starts up, you may have one small adjustment and it'll stay the same up here, the flame will. And that's how you take a cheap Chinese made kerosene heater and make it more efficient like an expensive heater.